Welcome to Intergenerational Politics with Jill Wine-Banks and Victor Shi, where we host weekly political discussions that are engaging and relevant to all generations. This is Victor Shi. I will be an incoming freshman at UCLA next year, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this podcast.
And I'm Jill Wine-Banks, the author of The Watergate Girl, based on my experiences as the only woman on the Watergate trial team, and also co-hosting this podcast. And very pleased today to have a very special guest, Mark Cuban. Thank you for being with us. I'm sure that everyone who's listening today already knows who Mark is. Of course, he's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks and a star of Shark Tank, among many other impressive things. We plan to discuss today with Mark about sports and how teams can proceed under COVID and what the future of sports post-COVID may be, as well as the role of sports teams in terms of the social movements of today. And I'd also like to talk to him about his time on Shark Tank. I know that our audience would be very interested in hearing about that, and maybe giving some advice to Victor's generation and the future entrepreneurs and leaders of tomorrow based on his Shark Tank experience and his ownership of a sports team. So thank you very much for being with us, Mark. Victor is going to start our conversation with you.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to it.
Of course. Okay, so by this time of year, under normal circumstances, we usually see football teams kick off with tens of thousands of fans. Also, basketball teams are just about to begin usually. But obviously, with this pandemic, we're seeing sports being reimagined both on the professional and collegiate level. So for the college sports, one of my friends was saying how his university, Notre Dame, is putting up plastic cardboard figures of students to replace real students to give that effect of a live audience. And, as you know, on the professional level, many games are completely without an audience. Yet we're seeing Donald Trump, say we need sports to come back. And, undoubtedly this COVID-19 pandemic is going to hurt revenue for sports players and teams. So I guess tell us, based off your experience with the Dallas Mavericks, what you think the best approach is for teams to take during this unprecedented time.
Well, first and foremost, safety, right? Because you can't do anything. No one's going to trust you if your players, staff, stakeholders aren't safe. And that's really the greatest challenge when it comes not just to sports or live entertainment, but to all business. People want to feel confident that wherever they go, whatever they're going to do, they're going to be safe. And so that's the first and foremost challenge. From there, then it depends on the circumstances, because, over the last 7 months now since the NBA shut down and suspended play, so much has changed, but it hasn't quite changed enough, right? When the pandemic first started, we just knew that there was risk. We didn't know how much risk. And I think we were a little bit arrogant as Americans that we were just going to blaze right through this and we will get this fixed because that's what we do. And it's possible we could have if we had followed, the appropriate protocols and taken the appropriate steps. Who knows? But the reality is here we are 7 months later, give or take a few days, and we still have that same uncertainty, but at least there's hope with the vaccine. And I happen to be one of those people that is confident that the vaccine will come and work. I know a lot of people are comparing this to vaccine remedies from previous viral diseases or viruses. But the reality is this is the first time we've ever seen the entire world pretty much work together to come up with a solution. So that gives me confidence and hope. And how that applies to the NBA is that with the vaccine that people take and are confident in, you take one course of action, and that's hopefully opening things up, making sure you have a clean environment, making sure you have as much of a hands-free, touch-free environment as you can, and making people feel confident and safe. If we don't have a vaccine, then all bets are off. And you'll see some of what you're seeing in stadiums with football, and we've seen it in arenas as well for different types of sporting events and other events where you're going to have limited capacity. And everybody's going to have to social distance. And there's going to be a very specific course of action that every fan has to take in order to participate. And so obviously my hope is for the former, that we get to vaccine and it works. Because if that's the case, then I think from a business perspective for us, there's going to be an enormous snapback of demand. There is so much cabin fever, so much pent up demand for people to get out and feel confident when they leave the house, right? That they're going to be looking for things to do that are very communal. And going to a sporting event is certainly one of those things.
You talked about, the need for a vaccine. You talked about the need for, putting the safety and health of everyone first. Compared to the NFL, which most recently saw Cam Newton test positive, which resulted then in games being postponed, it seems like the NBA is doing much better in terms of the number of players testing negative for the virus. So, first, what is the NBA doing that's going so effectively, and how should other sports leagues and associations change their current framework to make it more like the NBA's model?
Well, there's a couple things there, Victor. One, the NFL teams, the players, there's 53 players on a team compared to 17 for the NBA. In terms of staff, there can be more than 100 plus for an NFL team, whereas far fewer for the NBA. And that smaller size allowed us to do a bubble at Walt Disney World. And so we were able to create a safe environment, which we also did for Shark Tank. We kind of one up the NBA and did a Shark Tank bubble, which allowed us to shoot season 12. But so by creating a bubble, we were able to keep everybody safe. We had zero positives, across the course of time that, there's another game Friday night in the finals with the Lakers versus the Heat. Everybody tune in on ABC. But we've been able to keep everybody safe in the bubble. Whereas with the NFL, they've tried to take the steps that they hope can keep people safe, but there's still a matter of trust that didn't enter into the equation with the NBA. Because in the NBA, if you didn't follow the exact protocols within the bubble, then you were kicked out of the bubble, right? There were no, we weren't taking any risks. We were trying to reduce our probability of infection to as low as we could possibly get it. The NFL, that's difficult because guys are traveling to different cities, teams are traveling to different cities. Players are not all just staying together in a quarantine, effectively hotel. And so there's far more touch points. And so it's unfortunate that the NFL has had players test positively and those numbers are growing. But it's not unlikely. It would have been very difficult to go positive test free. And look, even with the NBA in a bubble environment, we expected there to be positive tests. We really did, because it's very difficult to control. And there's so many uncertainties as it relates to the virus and transmission, that you try to, put your finger in all the holes in the dam. But, we were fortunate in that we really didn't get caught. But it's going to be difficult for the NFL and for other sports. The sports that'll have it the easiest are those like the NBA, who can play in a bubble. But again, now that the NBA, the NHL, MLB is winding down, and as we look forward to next season, I don't think anybody wants to play in a bubble again. So we're all really, really hoping that we get a vaccine and people are confident in it.
So following up on that, that leads to the question of, when do you think there might be a time we can return to normal? Because you are so right when you said people are getting cabin fever and would love to go to a sports event, would love to go to the theater, would love to go to whatever their special cultural event is. Even just a movie would be a delight.
Right.
And so do you think we'll ever go back to the pre-COVID non-restrictions in sporting events?
Yeah, I think we will, for sure. I mean, think back to 1918. There were sporting events back then, and they were less literate scientifically about responding to a virus, and had to go through, a full course effectively of spread. And yet here we are 100 years later, and until this hit at the beginning of the year, we don't think about that at all. Now, we don't want to have to wait 100 years, right? But, growing up, there was never a thought in my mind that, we had to worry about viruses and pandemics. I mean, we've seen the swine flu, we've seen Ebola, we've seen a lot of these things, but, again, maybe it's arrogance, but we didn't think that they were going to change our way of life like this has. And so just like they got through it and got to the other side, and there was normalcy, I think we'll do that again. And I think we'll be a lot smarter going forward. And you just hope, that over the course of time, we don't forget. Like you were involved with Watergate, and it seems that we've forgotten a lot of those lessons from the 70s. And you just hope at some point we don't forget those lessons going forward.
Right. I agree. Although I do hope that 100 years hence, just as we are now 100 years after the Spanish flu, that people we'll learn from that. And of course, we have much better scientific capabilities now. And as you said, the world has come together on that. Unfortunately, we have partly dropped out of the world by dropping out of the World Health Organization. But let's continue sort of on a non-COVID part of sports, which is what's happening in sports in terms of politics and what the role of sports are. I mean, sports athletes are heroes to many Americans. They set a tone. They can communicate a message in ways that no one else can. The Colin Kaepernick bending a knee was certainly a dramatic presentation of that. And so what I want to look at is, of course, he's paid a heavy price for that. And I'm old enough that I remember back to Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali, and the price that he paid for taking a political popular position. So in the aftermath of George Floyd, what do you think the role of sports athletes and teams is in this movement for Black Lives Matter, or whatever the next political issue happens to be?
You know, athletes across almost all sports make the choice whether or not they're going to become a brand and how big a brand they want to become. You know, you don't have to be on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook for that matter, or TikTok these days for that matter, right? And if you are, you don't have to try to send a global message or try to build your fan base. You know, even if you're the best player in your league, you know, you can choose to have just a minimal presence. But when you choose to have a significant presence, like some of our athletes have, you have every right to use it, and you know, because you've chosen to become that person, right? That's the beauty of this country. When you get a platform, it's yours to use in this social media environment. And I'm proud of our guys. Now, I don't always agree with them, but that's okay. You know, they've worked hard to get to where they are. They worked hard to let people know what they care about. And it's completely up to them as individuals. And the NBA is more of a personality-driven sport than almost any other. You know, when you think of the biggest personalities in this country, particularly based off their social media followings, it's almost all, I mean, it pretty much is all NBA players. You know, they see us, we're in games. I mean, everybody, you know, knows who our biggest name players are. And you see some players use that platform and others don't. In terms of the league, it's kind of the same thing. You know, because of our players, because of our governors, because of who we are as an organization, you know, we have a culture that we've cultivated over 40, 50 years. This isn't something that just pops up. The NBA has always been socially active, always. We've always taken a stand and trying to really have an impact on moving what we think are the best ideals for the United States, and really are you know, what all come back to the fundamental understanding of liberty and justice for all. Not for some, for all. And to me, when you stand up for proven American ideals, and I'm not talking about party, right? You know, all parties and all individuals can have their own political thoughts. But when you stand up for, you know, ideals that are part and parcel to the United States of America, then I think you're doing the right thing. And yeah, there's going to be haters. There's going to be people who advocate against you. But that's okay. Like you brought up Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay turning to Muhammad Ali. During the prime of his fighting career, he wasn't allowed to fight because he wouldn't go to Vietnam. And he stood up for what he believed in. Look at the 1980 Olympics. We backed out. Look at the 1968 Mexico Olympics when you had, I always get these names, I think Juan Carlos, John Carlos, or John Smith. I forget the three track guys that got on the days and held their arms up in solidarity. And so there's always going to be athletes that use their platform. And I mean, going back to Jesse Owens, you know, we stood behind Jesse Owens in the Berlin Olympics in 1936. We take pride in it. It's just that right now, when you have a dearth of leadership, that it's really difficult. A lot of these topics become very divisive because people just are bandwagoners. They fall to their side, right? They want to be on their team. And that's unfortunate, but that's what happens when there's a lack of leadership.
It's so interesting because I think one of the reasons that possibly the NBA players are so much better known is that you can actually see them while they're playing. They aren't covered up with helmets and shoulder pads. And the only thing you can tell is if you read their name. you can see them. And it reminds me of a couple things. One, which is I'm from Chicago, and
Yep.
Michael Jordan is maybe the biggest hero of the NBA ever in the history of the NBA. And when I first started traveling to Europe, it was always, if you said you were from Chicago, people would go, "Oh, the mafia."
Yeah, right.
And now you
Yeah.
go to Europe, and for maybe not now, right now, but a few years ago, you would go and they'd say, "Oh, the home of Michael Jordan."
Yep.
So it really became that he represented Chicago. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Of course.
Yeah. And when you talk about the impact of sports people, it is important to know their names and what they stand for and what their brand is. When I first started practicing law, was not a sports fan except for the Cubs. I've always been a Cubs fan, but at the coffee, I was always the only woman in the room. And so when it came time for a coffee break, the conversation was always about sports, and I would lag behind. And so I finally developed, my husband would give me a sports line of the day. So I could go into the room and say, "Wasn't Kareem Jabbar great last night?"
Yeah,
and participate in the conversation. So it's also part of our culture.
In the aftermath of George Floyd's protest, one of the good things that came out of that was that my generation started to look at some of these race-related issues with a skeptical eye. We started questioning a lot of these assumptions. In terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, in the aftermath of that, we saw a lot of these corporations kind of come out and say they would support it openly. And then, our generation would kind of notice that, there's no diversity on their boards, or that the board of directors are overheard making comments behind closed doors that don't reflect their point of view of supporting Black Lives Matter. So, in terms of the NBA and other sports organizations in general, is there more work to be done when it comes to achieving racial justice and equality? And if not, what can be done about that?
Yeah, and that's not an NBA issue. That's a global issue. That's a United States issue. Systemic racism is something that is a challenge, right? It's always got to be addressed, and it's not something that's going away quickly. And so, every corporation has got to make their own decision on what they're going to do and whether or not they're going to be involved or be apolitical. You can't tell somebody what to do, but at the same time, Gen Z, your generation, is very cognizant of what they are or are not doing, how they treat their employees. Is there diversity? What communities are they focused on? Are they taking steps to not only check off the boxes for diversity and inclusion, but actually walking the walk and not just talking the talk, right? And and remember, your generation is going to grow up. When Jill and I were kids, right? It was hippies and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and don't trust anyone over 30, and mom. And it was, if you would have told me that that generation from when I was a little kid would grow up to be the boomers that are conservative Republicans, I would have laughed at you. So it really comes down to your generation in terms of ending racism, right? Having cultural changes. What do you guys do? Because corporations can talk all they want and spend money and all that, but you're the consumer, right? You're who they want to reach. You're on you understand social media and branding yourself. Every Gen Z person on social media is their own brand. If I go and look at your TikToks, if you're on TikTok, or your Instagrams, right? Or look at anything you put on YouTube, you present yourself the way you want people to see you. And so do all of your friends and peers. And you as a consumer are going to be looking for the same things in companies you do business with. Do they have the same social goals and the same social desires that you guys do, right? Because if somebody doesn't live up to the expectations that you have, you're not going to buy their products, because you certainly don't want to be seen in a TikTok video with a brand, wearing a brand or repping a brand or near a brand that doesn't represent your social values. And so as much as we'd like to see the corporations lead the way, and in some cases they can invest in communities, they can invest in people of color and LGBTQ people and give them capital to create companies, and those things are all great. But that's not going to end racism. It's going to take your generation, talking to each other. People of Jill and my generation, white people, can't talk about race. We never talk about race. In your generation, it's no big deal. An Asian person can talk to a black person who can talk to a white person and talk about race, and everybody's comfortable. When you see a friend, when you see an interracial couple, you don't think twice. The baby boomer generation still has to double take, because that's the antithesis of what we grew up with. When I was a kid in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Pirates were the first baseball team to have an all non-white lineup. And that upset people to no end. Now we don't care, because my generation back then didn't care, right? But now we have to take it to the next level. And it really, I'm putting the pressure on you, Victor.
Oh God.
Really, your generation that got to lead the way, because
it is up to his generation. But I also was raised in a home where I was taught to accept people based on their qualifications,
Absolutely.
not on the color of their skin.
On that point, Jill,
Yeah.
You know, our peers growing up, right? You know, the Voting Rights Act was still brand new, right? There were still people trying to keep African Americans and African American women from voting. So while your family and my family may have been raised the same way, right? Where you don't ever, I mean, no, right? Everybody's equal. You treat everybody with respect, no matter what they look like or where they're from. That's how I was raised. But my neighbors, oh my, you know, they were a different beast. My friends' dads were different beasts. And so, you know, the generations were different.
Yeah, and I do have to test. I don't have TikTok, but my peers who do have TikTok, I can attest to the fact that social media is part of our identity. Like we attach our Instagram handles, our Twitter handles to everything that we do, because it's like the power of social media is incredible, and my generation knows how to navigate that. It's really cool.
I think you'll take the same picture over and over and over again to get it right. Right? Or how many pictures you'll go through just to get the perfect picture up. It's like you're an ad agency with brand Victor, right? And that's how all your peers are. But that is so powerful, because in terms of consumerism and defining the economy and what corporations will do going forward, particularly as you get out into the workforce, you're gonna recognize that. And you're not gonna do business with anybody who doesn't match up with your values. And that is so powerful. And so what I say to companies today that I talk to is like, how you treat your customers, how you treat your employees is how your brand will be defined for the next 20 years. Because the younger millennials and Gen Z, they're not forgiving, not forgiving at all. And you just have a completely different viewpoint. And when you get into the workplace, you're much more entrepreneurial than older generations. And so you're going to look for new ways to compete with those people who are out of touch.
Before I go to the next question, I want to follow up on some of the things you've said, which is, as the millennials and Gen Z and Gen X are branding themselves, I think they're not always thinking about what it means when they get out of high school, when they get out of college, when they go to apply for a job. Their brand is online and employers are looking at it. So the stupid things you do and post may actually keep you from getting a job. So that's one thing that they need to think about. The other thing, when we were talking about the 60s, 70s, let's not forget what sexism meant in terms of women. And the discrimination was, yes, absolutely. African Americans were definitely discriminated against, but so were women. Help wanted ads, which was how you got a job then in a newspaper, were categorized as help wanted male, help wanted female. But so let's go on to your current interchange. Go ahead.
Close to the ERA passed, right? And it's still short,
Close.
It still fell short. And so, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Joe.
Yeah. So you've had a recent exchange with Senator Ted Cruz as part of your being politically active. I want to just read you one of the tweets that he posted recently. I love at Houston Rockets and have rooted for them my entire life. I happily cheer for the Spurs and Mavericks against any non-Texas team. But at MCUBAN, Mark Cuban, and the NBA are engaged in a concerted effort to, one, insult their fans, and two, turn every game into a left-wing political lecture. That's dumb. So what's your reaction, to that tweet? And are ratings dropping, as Ted Cruz and Donald Trump claim?
Well, two different questions there. One, what's
Yes.
my nice to know where our senator from Texas is spending his time, and how he's prioritizing things. And two, are our ratings down? Well, it depends on how you compare them. To Victor's point early on, we're not playing in our regular season, and we're not playing in an environment where, that they're trying to compare ratings to. They're comparing ratings that are apples and oranges. As Victor mentioned, we're typically just getting our season started. And so not only were our TV broadcasts competing, not only were our TV broadcasts not typically when people would find our playoffs and end of season, but also Major League Baseball, the NHL, the NFL, horse racing, you name it, all the way down the list, the start of the TV season, all were competing for the same viewers. And so rather than just looking at us, look at the other sports. The NFL is down, not as much as us, but this is their season, right? And you can look at the NFL being down as a result of cord cutting and more fragmentation of audience because of more content choices. What would our ratings be if we were on Netflix or Amazon Prime? Because the NBA audience is much younger than any other sport. And so by definition, our audience cuts the cord more. But in terms of interest in the NBA, there was a survey that just came out, Morning Consult, I think, that said among Gen Z in particular, the NFL was the number one sport with 49% interested, and the NBA was the number two sport with 47% interested, and nobody else was close. But back to ratings, if you look at the NHL ratings, they were down significantly. And again, but they faced the same issues that we faced. But let's look at horse racing, right? The Triple Crown, the Preakness, the Kentucky Derby, and what's the other one? I forget. The one thing we know about horses, you can't say that they're woke, you can't say that they have a political opinion. Yet their broadcast viewership was down significantly and more than ours. And so it's not just an issue of politics. It's an issue of so many different things in terms of what's happening in the media coming together. Would I like our numbers to be higher? Of course, I'd like our numbers to be higher. Do I think they'll bounce back to, where on the normal projection where they would be because of cord cutting and everything? Yes. Our biggest challenge is trying to create an equilibrium between the fact that we're the most popular sport among young kids, right? It's not even close. And, we talked about social media following, et cetera. But those young kids don't have cable and satellite, yet that's where most of our games are broadcast. So that's our challenge in terms of business. How do we disrupt ourselves so that we're able to have our fans watch the games where, how, and when they watch them? And two, Gen Z consumes content in much smaller bites than we do, right? They want to watch the highlights. They're on TikTok. They're on Instagram. They can tell you about a LeBron dunk. And 2 seconds after it happens, they're seeing it on Instagram. But how do we turn that into business for the NBA and monetize that and make it so that our advertisers can also compete? So it's not to say that we don't have challenges, but it's not so much about the popularity of the NBA. It's the nature of change in media and consumption.
Yeah. So sticking with your political activism and what you've been doing, I read something about you were coming up with a stimulus plan, which right now is in danger as we understand it, and that you were proposing a $1,000 stimulus check be given to families.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is and why you think that would be effective?
So historically, when we try to build up the economy, whether it's in difficult times like this or otherwise, the Republicans like to do trickle down, right? Reduce taxes and try to open things up so it's easier for entrepreneurs to start businesses. And that in turn would lead to people hiring, or there's more money available for corporations to hire more people. And that trickle down does not work, right? It works a little bit on the margin, but it doesn't lead to wholesale increases in employment. The Democrats have their own version of trickle down. They say, let's invest in new programs. And by getting people to apply for those programs and to participate in programs, it'll trickle down to them and then they'll benefit and that'll help everybody. I take a completely different look, that we're in a consumer-driven economy, that 66% of our GDP is driven by consumption. And rather than going through the middleman, the corporations, and making money easier for them via, reduction in tax dollars or other mechanisms, loans, whatever it may be, or just funding these programs and hoping it gets down to people in need, I'd rather just drop the money in people's laps. And I'm not talking about UBI, where this is an extended thing that's available all the time forever. What I've said is that every 2 weeks for some limited period of time during the pandemic, initially 2 months, because you can always extend it, then every 2 weeks, we'd give people $1,000, but there's a stipulation. They have to spend it within 10 days. Because what happens is, this is what I look at as being trickle up, not trickle down, but trickle up, right? Because that'll allow people to pay the rent, that'll allow people to buy the things that are of necessity to them, and that prevents the government from keeping alive businesses that consumers don't want to keep alive, right? It sounds good in theory to give money to restaurants and to all these businesses, and that keeps people employed. And that was a good idea early on, like right at the beginning of the pandemic, when we didn't think it would last this long. Let's just give businesses some money so that they can keep their employees on payroll. And that's cheaper than having people go on unemployment. Economically, that made perfect sense. Now where we're going through this process called creative destruction. When people don't go to restaurants, it's not that they don't eat. It's they find different ways to eat and entertain themselves at the same time. When they don't go to sporting events and movies, it's not that they're not being entertained. They're finding different mechanisms, different ways to be entertained. So rather than trying to keep afloat businesses that may not deserve, that maybe shouldn't be kept afloat because habits and buying and how we buy things has changed, by giving money to people to spend, one, it allows them to take care of the necessities. Two, it allows those businesses that they want to do businesses to stay alive, because three, it's the most efficient way. There's nothing in the middle to reduce the amount of money available, right? So if you do it through a trickle down, it has to go through multiple steps. If you do it through democratic trickle down, it has to go through multiple steps of the government, and each step of the way makes it less efficient. And so by having it use it or lose it within the 10 days, that money gets stimulated right into the economy immediately to those businesses that need to be taken, where people want to spend their money. And so you don't have to worry about rent abatements. You don't have to worry about, lease abatements and people or mortgages not getting paid, because that's what people are going to pay with that money. And then once they've paid, hopefully, their rent, and 2 weeks later, they get another $1,000, same thing. They can use it for groceries, they can use it for whatever, but allowing American citizens to make those choices, it takes care of their necessities, and it truly is a trickle up. Now, I've also said in corollary to that I think we need a transitional jobs program, that there are a lot of jobs that would be very productive in this country, tracking and tracing as an example, working to helping those who are at risk of COVID virus, because it's very difficult for them to get care and support. And it's also very dangerous because they typically don't have much economically. And so they have to trust almost anybody who comes to their door. And so you've seen a lot of older people get sick and die. Whereas if this is an organized program, not only will it work now, not only will it be safer, but we know that, boomers are the fastest aging demographic, and we're living longer than our predecessors, right? And so you're going to need people that are going to be there for old age homes and, be there to provide healthcare for an aging population. So these are among the jobs that are very productive, that can immediately help people have a productive job and also contribute to the economy. So that was the logic behind my thinking.
Boy, I am so glad I asked that question. That was a great answer. And although maybe the biggest headline of the answer was coming from you as one of the most successful entrepreneurs and businessmen in our country, is that trickle down does not work. That's a big headline.
Well, remember, just trickle down on both sides, right? I don't want to take sides, right?
Yeah.
Trickle down does Republicans, and trickle down does not work for Democrats either. Trickle up does work.
Yeah.
So I know that you also considered running for president. And so let's say, you are President Mark Cuban right now, and you
Uh-huh.
face this COVID, pandemic. Is this what you would do, or what would you do to combat some of the economic devastation that we now face?
Well, first step, you have to be honest, you have to be transparent, and you have to allow people who know what they're doing to talk, right? And listen to them. Second, you have to be clear but science is trial and error. And when you get into something that's new, like the COVID virus, you're not going to have answers all the time. It's going to be a work in progress. And we're going to continue to try to get smarter about it. So if something we thought made sense in March doesn't make sense in October, that's not unusual. So those are the first things you have to communicate. The second thing you need to do is mandate masks. This is not a freedom issue. This is no different than seatbelts, because the only way that people are going to be safe is by wearing masks. We're staying home. Yeah, you can stay out of people's ways but realistically, you're going to need masks. Not only are you going to need masks, but you're going to need to get people the right masks, right? And I'm not saying we all use N95s, but the cost benefit analysis of buying people masks and making them available to them is far less of a cost than what we're seeing as an impact on employment and the economy that we're seeing now, right? And so those are the basic blocking and tackling things that I would do. And then again, once you build up trust in leadership and just show any leadership and compassion, then people are going to have a lot more confidence in a vaccine. Because they're going to say, you know what, this person has been honest and authentic with us. He's been as transparent as he's allowed to be. He hasn't held back where there's been differing opinions. He's been open about them and brought them to the forefront so they can be discussed. He recognizes that science is about trial and error, so there's risk to everything. But you know what? I'm going to trust this vaccine. And that key, that trust, is the linchpin to how we move forward.
Yeah. I hope that if not that Donald Trump and Mike Pence are probably listening, but if they are listening, take a couple of lessons from Mark, because those are so needed right now during this time. Let's switch to a lighter topic and one of the last topics of today's discussion, which is, many fans adore you because of your time on Shark Tank. You mentioned this at the outset of the podcast, that, you guys are filming differently now for season 12. First, what's been your experience like on Shark Tank? Because Jill and I, we find Shark Tank fascinating. But what's it like being on with, the Mr. Wonderful, or being on, a judge on Shark Tank?
I love it. I love it. And I don't do it for any reason more than it sends a great message to potential entrepreneurs that that you could be that person walking on the carpet and pitching us the deal. And even if you don't make it to Shark Tank, look at the people that come on the Shark Tank someone's probably just like you. And if they can do it, you can do it. And that message that it sends is just, to me, so valuable and so important. And that's why I do the show. Now, in terms of is it fun? It's fun most of the time, right? Because we all get along and we all like each other. Even Kevin, even though he's a jerk sometimes, you still like him as a. But the battles and the animosity and the heat that goes on, it's real. It's all real. But because of that, there's no more joy in life than dunking on Mr. Wonderful. It's just part of, the fun of it, or taking a deal from any of the other sharks. So I love doing it. It sends a great message. And oh, by the way, our premiere episode is Friday, October 16th on ABC. So it's coming up. So check it out. It's this season, we alluded to it earlier. We were literally in a bubble. And so it was a completely different way of shooting. All the sharks are 6.5 feet apart. The entrepreneurs, we don't get to high five them or play with them or talk, get up close to them. They all are social distance and more than social distanced away. But the entrepreneurs also had to quarantine. And the fact that they spent 8 days in quarantine meant they were committed to being there, that this was incredibly important to them. And so the deals are better. I did more deals this season 12 coming up, than I did in any season prior. So it's intense. The bubble was intense. Literally, I got up in the morning, someone knocked on my door that looked like they just came out of a science fiction movie. We walked down the hall. We had to take one specific elevator. We had to follow tape on the floor and tape on the wall. We went to hair and makeup. Well, first we went and changed. I changed in my suit, went to hair and makeup. They basically had hazmat suits on, did hair and makeup. There was a Corona person that watched our every move to make sure we adhere to all the protocols, shot on the set, started at 9 a.m. shooting, had an hour for lunch, shot until 7 p.m., went back up to my room, ate, worked out, went to sleep, rinse and repeat the exact same thing every single day.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, it was a grind at some level, but it was still well worth it.
Yeah, and we hope that our audience tunes in next Friday, the 16th, on ABC. I'm so excited for the season. Wow, that is very exciting.
Me too. And I have another question about Shark Tank, which is needs a little bit of background. When I was doing some research about you before doing this episode, I suddenly started getting ads for products endorsed by Shark Tank, which I suppose isn't a surprise because we all know whatever research you do leads to ads. I clicked on one of them just to follow through to see it. And what I found was that it ended up saying that it was the one time in the history of Shark Tank that all of you had,
the keto ads and all that?
Yes, exactly. But then I found that there was more than one that claimed that it was all five of you had agreed. One was the keto ad, one was two sisters who did apparently get funding from one or more of you, but it wasn't for a diet product. So are you being hacked? What's happening?
No.
Why am I getting all these fake ads?
It's a scam and we hate it. What platform were you on? Were you on Facebook?
No, I did the research through Google.
Just on Google? Okay. I'm making a note.
Yeah, it was.
Because it's a scam. And we've done everything possible with the FBI and others and law enforcement to get those folks shut down. And it's horrible because I get emails once every few months or every few weeks now. Somebody who bought them and they can't turn it off and they realize it's a scam and they email me. And I feel awful telling them they have to, close your credit card and, tell the credit card company what's going on. But yeah, it's a scam, and I'm going to reach out to Google, and because I didn't realize it came up when you searched for one of the sharks, because I hadn't seen that.
It did, and I also got text messages from the keto ad. So it was, and it was one of those things I looked at and went, "Wow, if Shark Tank thought this was good, maybe it's that miracle product." And all of us during COVID have had a little bit of a comfort food eating thing. So I was thinking, well, this is really wonderful that I did this and I'm going to get this product. And then when I researched it further, it was clear that it was a scam and that it wasn't something that Shark Tank had done. But so I didn't get taken. But let me just ask you, so what would you say your most successful investment has been since you've been on Shark Tank? Sure. One or two, however many you think was the most wonderful thing you've done.
Called Panoramic, that wrote an app for the iPhone that was an early equivalent of computer vision, right? Now, the iPhone, it required the iPhone to be a certain format or a certain layout, right? So it had to have the flat bezel. If you remember back to the iPhone 4, you could just stand it up and then using the sensors, it would sensors turn and you can create a panoramic video. Well, when the iPhone changed it, the way it looked and the features of the physical features of it, we had to pivot to full computer vision. And fast forward 5 years later, if you go to the Carvana website and look to buy a car online through them, you can see that you can open up for any car, you can open up the car door, spin it, look at turn it upside down, see any actual piece of the car. That was what the panoramic software evolved to. And we sold that company a couple of years ago to Carvana back when the stock was 18. Last time I looked, the stock was like 200 plus. So that by far is my blow away best deal. And I've had, of the 150, give or take, companies that I've done on Shark Tank over 10 years that I've been on, it follows a normal distribution. I've sold and done really well with 10%. I've, sold and done okay, or they're operating and returning cash flow with another 15%, 25% suck, and the other 50% are, chugging along, as good businesses.
Sounds like a regular record for a successful entrepreneur, I'd say.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a time when all of you have invested in one? Just going back to that fake ad that
Yeah,
says that was
there
the one.
was one, Cupboard Pro. That's what it was. So there was a fireman who dreamed of coming on Shark Tank, and he had a cutting board that was really cool. It had this unique design where it had catch all for any moisture and for any your remnants. When you're done chopping, I'm not a big cook, but and you push it onto this thing. It was really cool. But he had been part of 9/11, and then one of the fire trucks called in 9/11 and ended up catching cancer and ended up dying. And his kids, and right around the same time, his wife died of cancer as well. It was just a horrific story. And his kids wanted to keep his dream alive, and they all came on Shark Tank together. And so Cupboard Pro all got a deal from all 5 of us. And the company's just crushing it. The 3 kids are just doing amazing things. So I'm really proud that we were able to do this with them. And we continue to donate the profits to Mr. Young's firehouse, where he was a fireman, for their foundation.
That's amazing.
Okay, I have to buy a Cupboard Pro.
Likewise. Yeah. Okay, so to draw this discussion to an end, I have to say, Mark, you probably know this, but you are literally an icon for my generation for both being on Shark Tank and also being the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. And going into this podcast, I know I was talking to my peers and I was like, Mark Cuban might come on, or Mark Cuban is going to come on. And they were all like, no way. But, for students who are about to go into college, there's so much uncertainty from the job market to online school. Yep. So, I want to ask you, for those who want to be an entrepreneur or business person like yourself, what advice would you give them as they navigate these really strange and uncertain times?
So in my opinion, going to school is a good thing. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to know the language of business. You have to know about finance. You have to know about accounting. You have to know about marketing. You have to know about sales. You have to know computer science to at least a certain level, because the things you don't know, you're immediately dependent on somebody else. And that means having to go out there and either partner and give up equity, or raise money because you need to hire certain positions and you can't afford to do it by yourself. The more you know, the more equity you get to control, because you're less dependent at the beginning on somebody else. So that's part one. So going to college and taking business classes is very beneficial, and I'm all for it. In terms of which college, you need to go to a college you can afford, because the one thing that keeps you from starting a business is debt. And so if I was just going to Indiana today, most likely I would go to a local community college or do it online. I would take classes online, just test out of classes at school, so that I would reduce my overall potential tuition bills and costs. So go to a school that you can afford. 3, you don't have to know what you're going to be when you grow up, right? The beauty of entrepreneurship these days is, it could be anything. It could be absolutely anything. And a lot of kids start, I know I want to start a business. I don't know what I want to do. What should I start? The more things you expose yourself to, the more you learn. Sooner or later, you're going to find something you love to do. It might not happen in school. It might not happen until 2, 3, 5 years out of school. But once you find something you love to do, then bust your ass to be great at it. Because nobody quits anything they're great at. And when you love doing something and you're really good, that's always the perfect foundation of a business. And then finally, you have to love to learn. Technology is just, everything changes, right? One day there's not a pandemic, the next day there is. There's so much is evolving in technology that you have to be excited to learn, because you're going to be competing with me. And if you're not out there spending as much time learning as I do, I'm spending 3-4 hours a day. It might be, reading research papers on AI. It might be doing, tutorials on machine learning or GANs, or reinforcement learning, and learning what applies where, or reading books about it. If you're not doing it, and I am, I'm going to kick your ass. It's going to be that simple. And you always have to recognize, 99% of the businesses that are started have competition. And if you're going to have competition, how hard are they working? You're going to have to outwork and outsmart those people. And that requires always having a lifelong thirst for learning.
Well, that was
Mark, this was the most inspirational. It was fantastic. You are a great guest. I learned a lot and I was inspired. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, guys. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I like the give and take between you two and the diversity of perspectives, you know, because you're coming from completely different places. So that made it interesting for me as well.
I always find it hard to believe that Victor is a rising freshman.
I know.
And that he just turned 18. We met when he was 17. So it's quite amazing to me how sophisticated he is. And he gives me hope for the future of our country.
Because I know I certainly wasn't sophisticated at 18. That's for dang sure.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all for joining us today. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. I want to point out that I am wearing a very special Jill's pin today. And Victor is holding up his version of it, and he'll be wearing it on the next episode. It is, of course, a symbol, logo from Intergenerational Politics Podcast, which we hope you are following, that you've subscribed to, and will be watching all future episodes. Thank you again for joining us.